What if I told you that just 6 moments in history are responsible for most of the conflicts you see in the Middle East today? Not hundreds of events, not endless chaos. Just 6 turning points that quietly reshaped borders, identities, and power. And here's the unsettling part. The people who made these decisions never imagined their consequences would last for generations. So what really happened, and why does it still matter today? Number 6. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Let's start where everything begins to crack. For over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire controlled much of the Middle East, holding together different religions, cultures, and identities under one system. It wasn't perfect, but it created a kind of balance that kept the region relatively stable. Then World War I shattered that balance, and suddenly, a massive power vacuum appeared. But here's where everything changes. Instead of independence, Britain and France stepped in and secretly divided the region through the Sykes-Picot Agreement. They drew borders not based on identity, culture, or history, but on their own strategic interests. Some of these borders were literally drawn with a ruler on a map by people who had never even been there. Entire communities were split, rival groups were forced together, and new countries were created that had never existed before. And this is where the first major crack in stability begins. But here's something most people overlook. These borders didn't just create countries, they created future conflicts that were built into the system from day one. Decisions made in quiet rooms during wartime would go on to affect millions of lives for generations. And the most surprising part? Many of those borders still exist today, almost unchanged. This wasn't just the end of an empire, it was the beginning of a completely new and unstable order. Number 5. The creation of Israel, 1948. Now this is where that crack turns into something much bigger. After World War II, global pressure led to the creation of Israel. The United Nations proposed dividing Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, but Arab leaders rejected it, and almost immediately, war broke out. But this wasn't just another war. This was a moment that would define generations. Israel survived and expanded its territory, but at the same time, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Now pause for a second and think about that. Imagine leaving your home believing you'll return in a few days, and never coming back. That memory doesn't disappear. It becomes identity, it becomes history, and it becomes a conflict that continues to shape the region even today. And here's where the story deepens. This wasn't just about land, it became about identity, belonging, and survival. Every generation that followed inherited not just the conflict, but the emotions tied to it. Over time, this issue expanded beyond borders and became a global political and humanitarian debate. And even today, decades later, it remains one of the most sensitive and unresolved issues in the world. Number 4. The Suez Crisis, 1956. Now you might think that European powers still controlled everything at this point, but 1956 proved otherwise. Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, made a bold decision to nationalize the Suez Canal, one of the most important trade routes in the world. Britain, France, and Israel responded with military force, expecting to quickly regain control. But then something unexpected happened. The United States and the Soviet Union pressured them to withdraw, forcing an end to the conflict. And just like that, everything shifted. This was the moment European dominance in the Middle East effectively ended. But it also created something new: Arab nationalism, the idea that the region could unite and control its own future. It sounded powerful, almost unstoppable. But in reality, unity proved far more difficult than expected, and slowly, that vision began to fall apart. But here's the twist most people don't expect. Even though foreign control weakened, internal challenges began to rise. Different countries started competing for leadership instead of cooperating. Economic struggles and political rivalries made unity harder to sustain. And what once looked like a powerful movement slowly turned into fragmented ambitions across the region. Number 3. The Iranian Revolution, 1979. And when one system fails, something else replaces it. This is where the fourth turning point arrives. In 1979, Iran shocked the world by overthrowing its monarchy and replacing it with an Islamic republic. Almost overnight, a close ally of the United States became one of its biggest adversaries. But this wasn't just a political shift, it was ideological. For the first time, A modern state openly rejected Western influence and built its system around a combination of religion and governance. And here's where things get even more serious. This didn't just change Iran, it reshaped the entire region. Rivalries intensified, alliances shifted, and a new form of influence began spreading across borders. Once again, the balance of power moved. But here's what makes this moment even more impactful. It introduced a new type of competition, not just for territory, but for influence and ideology. Countries began reacting not only to military threats, but to ideas spreading across borders. This added a new layer of complexity to regional politics. And from that point on, conflicts were no longer just physical, they became ideological as well. Number 2. The Iraq War, 2003. Now we move to one of the most controversial turning points, and the moment the United States became deeply involved. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein. The plan seemed simple: remove the regime, stabilize the country, and move forward. But reality is never that simple. Because removing a government is easy, rebuilding a stable system is not. Without strong institutions, Iraq descended into chaos. Different groups fought for power, violence increased, and extremist organizations found an opportunity to rise. A war that was meant to create stability ended up creating even more instability. Decisions made in a few months created consequences that are still unfolding today. And here's the deeper issue. When power structures collapse suddenly, they don't disappear, they fragment. Different factions rush to fill the gap, often competing violently. This creates long-term instability that's extremely difficult to reverse. And in Iraq's case, the ripple effects didn't stay within its borders, they influenced the entire region. But here's what makes this even more striking. What looked like a short-term intervention quietly turned into a long-term transformation of regional power dynamics. And the question still remains: was this a turning point toward stability, or the start of a much larger chain reaction? Number 1. The Arab Spring, 2011. And finally, we reach the most recent turning point. In 2011, the Arab Spring began as a wave of protests across the region. People demanded better lives, more freedom, and an end to corruption. For a moment, it felt like a new beginning. What made this moment unique was how quickly it spread from one country to another, almost like a domino effect. But then everything changed. In many countries, change didn't lead to stability, it led to uncertainty. Libya collapsed, Yemen entered a prolonged crisis, and Syria became one of the most devastating wars in modern history. What started as hope quickly turned into chaos. And this reveals something powerful. Change alone is not enough. Without structure, planning, and unity, change can create even bigger problems. In many cases, the speed of change outpaced the ability to manage it. And here's what makes this moment so important. It showed how fragile many systems already were beneath the surface. What looked stable from the outside was often under pressure internally. Once that pressure was released, the results were unpredictable. And even today, the effects of these uprisings continue to shape politics, economies, and conflicts across the region. The consequences are still unfolding in ways no one fully predicted at the time. And here's the deeper realization. Sometimes the most powerful movements begin with hope, but without direction, that hope can quickly turn into uncertainty. And that's why the story of the Arab Spring is still unfinished. The outcomes are still evolving, and the long-term impact is still being written. So now ask yourself this. What if the conflicts we see today aren't random? What if they're the result of decisions made decades ago, decisions that were never fully resolved, only passed forward from one generation to the next? Because once you understand these 6 events, everything starts to connect. The past isn't gone. It's still shaping the present, and maybe even the future. If you want more videos that break down complex history into simple, powerful stories like this, make sure you like and subscribe.